welcome to the Next Best Picture podcast, where I'm being joined right now by the co-directors for The Alabama Solution, Andrew Jarecki and Charlotte Kaufman. Thank you, both of you, for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
So I saw this film, this harrowing, really eye-opening film at the Sundance Film Festival, where initially there was some confusion over whether or not if it was actually going to be there or not. And I was like, oh, okay, it is actually playing here. And I was looking forward to it because I've been a huge fan, Andrew, of your work. Charlotte, both of you together, it's a winning combination in terms of investigative work into something that I don't think a lot of people are, quite frankly, aware of. But you guys have been working on this for many, many years, dating back to, I'm trying to guess, was it 2017?
2019.
Okay. So I was a little off, but yeah, somewhere around that vicinity there. What was the initial thing that sparked the interest? Was it a news clipping, something you saw on television? What made this start for you, the journey?
So just to clarify, because you pointed out a good thing about Sundance. The film was always going to be at Sundance, but we asked them, because it's an investigative piece, to hold the announcement, because it was just helpful to not have it be public until it was really public at Sundance. So you identified a good item. And in terms of how,
I was just going to say, it's important that we made sure everyone involved in the film was aware that it would be coming to Sundance, and that took a beat because of the various communication challenges and whatnot. So
I was going to say, because you guys get a lot of testimonials and a lot of confessionals and a lot of footage in this, that I'm sure a lot of red tape.
Safety consideration.
Well, and also, we're obviously concerned about the men who appear in the film, and they have had a lot of retaliation in the past because of their being outspoken for running this nonviolent protest movement. But it's something that that the authorities there have not been eager to publicize, obviously. So we were concerned about them as well. Totally. And just to answer your question about sort of the gestation of the film, I've made films about in and around the justice system before, and Charlotte has as well, and seen it from various perspectives. Obviously, the Jinx was from the perspective of investigating what ultimately was a series of murders, but have looked at a whole bunch of scenarios, like in Capturing the Freedmans, which was a completely other kind of wrongful conviction. And in this particular case, I guess we had heard rumblings about what was going on in the Alabama prison system, and it was on our radar. And then I was at home and I was talking to my daughter, who was 14, and she said, I know you're interested in Alabama. I've been reading this book by Anthony Ray Hinton, which is a book, autobiography by a guy who had been wrongfully convicted and stayed in Alabama prison for many years. And she said, she's 14, but she reads a lot. And I think she thought it would be of interest. And then the two of us kind of started reading it, and we ended up making this road trip to Montgomery just to sort of see what we could see. And while we were there, we met some people who were knowledgeable about it and knew that there was an opportunity to volunteer. And so I came back to New York, and Charlotte and I ended up going in as volunteers just to see what we would learn about the system. That was kind of our entry point.
Yeah. And so, as I was saying earlier, in terms of getting the level of access that you get here, a lot of safety concerns for the men that are involved, that are giving you this information through contraband cell phones. And I was really amazed at just how you were able to assemble this footage together to tell this very expansive story that is ongoing, obviously. But how did you convince them? Was there any convincing? And then once you did, can you tell me a little bit about the logistics of how you were able to safely obtain this footage, these testimonials?
So cell phones have been present in Alabama's prison system for over a decade now, I think, in varying degrees. And there have been people inside the prison system, like Kinetic Justice and Melvin Ray, who from the moment cell phones became available around like 2013, understood the value in using them to document what's happening inside, and also to reach the public, beyond the usual mechanisms that are surveyed and censored. So, usually if you're incarcerated, the only way that you can call out is a phone call that's monitored. Sometimes you get your privileges taken away from you for being able to communicate. You can't always reach the press, and vice versa. The press can't always reach you. So these men and many, many others from, as soon as phones were available, understood that they could, try to document and communicate with the outside world. So in terms of convincing, no, it didn't take, in terms of them wanting to reach the outside world, it did not take a lot of convincing. However, in terms of, getting them to not getting them, but like we ended up spending hours and hours and hours in conversation. And that was, a relationship built up over time. But they were ready to want this information out there.
It's like, it's hard because we've seen many narrative prison dramas, right, that highlight these abuses of power and show that there are organized killings that take place inside these prisons, just straight up murder in many instances. And the film does not shy away from presenting this not as narrative fiction, but as reality. And so I feel, though, as if it's a thing that we as a society have grown a little maybe desensitized to, because we want to believe that the systems are in place to protect these inmates, and that there's absolutely no way that it could ever be that awful. It could ever be that terrible. Why is this happening? Why is this something that is continuing to happen? Because it's not just Alabama. It's widespread.
Yeah, I think that's very true. First of all, the reason, or a reason why it's not on the radar of a lot of people in the public is because that is by design. These prisons are essentially treated like black sites. They're places that the press can't go. There's a lot of restriction on whether people who are inside are able to talk to anybody on the outside. Sometimes they're just shut off from communication for long periods of time. It seems kind of un-American, or at least the way we have traditionally seen America as being, open and people wanting to understand what their tax dollars are being used for. Right. So even though we're spending $80 billion a year on this system that incarcerates people, for the average American, you're driving down the highway, maybe you see a little metal sign that says XYZ Correctional Institution, and you probably think to yourself, well, I don't need to know what's going on back there. I'm sure there's some laws that keep it clean, but it's probably not a Hilton hotel, but I don't need to know much more than that. So I think to some extent, what these men have done inside by leading this nonviolent protest movement and getting the word out, is in some ways the only way that the public can find that out because of all the secrecy.
Yeah.
And there have been, very meaningful exposés of prisons, but limited to the written form. Like very in-depth Department of Justice reports from across the country of different states, fantastic investigative journalism, but when you can't see it and you can't actually be immersed in it, the public, doesn't quite understand it the same way. So this film actually lets people see it and connect with the people beyond what the written word can provide.
You brought up Sundance earlier, and, a matter of making sure that all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted before premiering the movie. Was there ever a point during production where the film was in danger of being shut down for any reason?
Well, there's certainly a moment in the film when we start to get nosy about what's happening in areas of the prison that we're not allowed to see. The one visit that we were able to make, And so that doesn't end well, but actually it sort of does, because it makes it really clear how secretive the prisons are. I don't think we ever had any question about moving forward. We never had any second thoughts about it, because when Charlotte and I went into the prisons and started talking to the men and found out what was really happening, they asked us to get the word out. They said, we don't have access to the general public, and if you can share our stories, that would be potentially something that would improve our situation. So we always felt sort of compelled to do it. I don't think there was much choice once we knew, A, that they were willing to talk to us, B, how bad things were, and C, just the stakes for these men, and how urgent their situation is. We just felt like there weren't a lot of people that were being given that information. So in a way, we were just, we were sort of responsible for it.
Yeah. Now, in terms of your working relationship, how do you both decide who does what, the coordination between the two of you, and communication of handling directing duties on this? So how does that work?
That's such a good question. What did you say? What did you say, Cheryl? Cheryl and I, having worked on this now for so long, we're definitely like finishing each other's sentences and are often thinking about the same things. Cheryl is a very, not only very good investigator, but also just an enormously empathetic person. And so for her to talk to the men inside especially was extremely valuable. I mean, she just is a trustworthy person, and I think feels that way. And I try to follow her lead, but we bring different things, I think. Like Charlotte actually shoots a lot of things and I don't shoot things, and then we argue about everything else.
I'll be hyperactive and run around with a camera and just try to document everything. And then Andrew can focus me and say, maybe we don't need to film this, 50th event or whatnot. But it's a very good partnership.
I'm always really fascinated when I talk to documentary filmmakers, because sometimes you have an idea of a subject you want to explore, but you may not necessarily know what the framework is going to be for the narrative structure. It's like sometimes people just dive in, they shoot footage, and then they figure it out later in the editing room. And then the ongoing element too of sometimes these stories don't end, and you could find yourself shooting for years and years and years. How do you know, or did you know heading in what you wanted the structure to be, and when did you decide this is the right endpoint to end things on?
I think something very unique about working with Andrew is that he has the gumption not to have a structure before going in, and to allow reality to reveal itself, and to allow what the findings to dictate how we approach the eventual storytelling. And I found that very refreshing and expansive, because I just want to try to investigate as much as possible. And, see, we're both very, very curious people. So trying not to, we didn't limit ourselves in the beginning. We really tried to go into the situation with beginner's mind and just allow our curiosity to lead our work. And then obviously over time, when you start discovering certain things, and when you start, forging relationships with certain people, it kind of, the momentum builds naturally. And but even still, once we got into the edit room, there were still a lot of really difficult editorial decisions to make and how to shape it. Luckily, we had an amazing editor, Paige Marcella, who really was a wonderful partner in helping us, narrow down. But I think we really approached it with beginner's mind, an open mind, and did not have a format or, a treatment going into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some people, sometimes people will send me a proposal, or they'll say, you know, here's the subject, you know, we would like you to direct this film or something. And sometimes it comes, or often it comes with like a packet or a deck. And, you know, I flipped through a few of those. I sort of stopped doing it, but I flipped through a few of those, and it's like, here's what the subject is, and here's what the arc of the story is going to be. And here are the people that have already agreed to be interviewed. And it's so confusing to me because I would never be able to think about a film like that. I mean, going in, you know, a tiny little fraction of what you're going to learn about the story. And in the very first conversation, someone says, you know, who you should talk to. And it always turns out to be a completely different direction and a completely different person than the people that were on the list that somebody would have created in advance. So I think you really just have to listen to the material and the experience, and just be open-minded and try to understand that something that may not feel like it's a story could become a story, very surprisingly. Just as one example, we were in touch with Melvin Ray, who's a extremely important person in the film. And Charlotte and I were both in Alabama, and we got a text message from him about an incident. And we understood that there was a person that had been harmed, and that tip led us to go ourselves while we were there and try to film what was happening. And that becomes a really important part of the film, something, again, that we never would have been able to predict in advance. And here it is, one of the central through lines of the entire film. So yeah, you got to keep reminding yourself that you don't actually know what the story is, you know, right. And then little by little, you start to say, you know, we do things like make lists, like Charlotte and I'll get in front of a blackboard or whiteboard and just make a list of like 100 things that we think are important that we've learned. And then you sort of vaguely try to draw little dotted lines between them and figure out, well, what, you know, is this a story that's cohesive? And is this a story that's at a place where it's worth telling? Because, sorry to go on, but, you know, the great thing about documentary film is time compression. You know, it's that you can see the flower bloom over the course of an entire season. You can see a story, compelling story, come together. Even if the events took place over 20 years, you get to see them in an hour and a half or something. And that is sort of the thrill of being able to see a story in this way. So you have to be willing to take the time to let that happen, and it will sort of tell you what it is.
Yeah. And the other thing I'd add to that is like, what we knew early on was that we were looking at an institution in free fall, but telling a systemic institutional story is not always the easiest for documentary, especially one that you can't have you can't just bring a camera to and follow verite style or something. So we knew that it was like very challenging, that it would be very challenging to like make sure it wasn't just an academic survey or an intellectual analysis of the failures of a system, but that it also included, you know, people and investigations and the things that, you know, humans actually are able to process stories, as opposed to just information. So we got, you know, that's part of the beauty of the time compression. Also the beauty of us being able to spend so much time making the film is that we're able to build those relationships, follow stories through. But yeah.
In terms of processing information, very quick question, and I'm going to end it with my final question. But my quick question is, how many hours of footage did you shoot? How many hours of footage did you receive? And then what was your assembly cut?
Oh my gosh, I couldn't say how many. We have terabytes on terabytes. Like we have so many, you know, a lot of it's archive. A lot of it's like very long, you know, we do very long interviews with subjects. Like we're not just like looking for sound bites. We really explore, right. And it's both a learning process versus, you know, and a interview process. But yes, I'd have to get back to you on that. Yes.
I'm just always fascinated because many years are spent working on these films, and it's mind-boggling to hear sometimes. And then my final question, the important question, what policy changes, reform do you hope to see as a result of this? Because the film is well reviewed, and that's great, and people are responding to it, but obviously you want it to be something bigger than that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've seen that there are people in the criminal justice reform space who've really embraced the film because they see it as a catalyst for change, that it is something that forces people to really come face to face with the reality of this crisis. And we are seeing that there's a lot of movement toward impacting the way that Alabama runs its prison system, but also more broadly around the U.S. And so, and also we've had like a big outpouring of people who just go to like the alabamasolution.com and they put in their information. And that is a super important part of it, is that the citizenry has to get involved and has to talk to their representatives and say, this isn't okay. This is not something that we think we should have in America. And also that it's not a partisan issue. When you see this film, we've shown it to a lot of conservatives who've said, look, I might be tough on crime, but that's not what we mean when we say tough on crime. This is a human rights disaster. We need to do something about it. And it's not a partisan matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the two things I would add to that are, one, we've seen in Alabama, there are, local leaders whose minds have changed about what's happening in the prison system. And the reason it's changed is because they heard from their constituents.
Mm-hmm.
They heard from like the people in the areas that they represent, that those people care about what's happening in the prisons. And I think that's like a very boiled down version of what people can do, is just be interested and be engaged and let, people know. I mean, there are concrete ways they can do this that like we're hoping to share with people, but just being interested and letting your leaders know that as a constituent that you are interested does make a difference. And the other thing that we, hope happen is that some of the, individuals, specific individuals, but everyone in the prison system, having the public light shined on them, we do think is a protective measure. And the more like public interest and engagement there is with them as individuals and with the whole community, we think is a protective measure. And we also hope people will, look more into these individuals. They have really, they all have their own freedom fights for their cases. They are on their own journey to return to their families. So that's another outcome.
Well, people will have an opportunity to engage and examine and look into it when it comes to theaters in select cities on October 3rd, and then on HBO and HBO Max on October 10th. Charlotte, Andrew, thank you, both of you, for your time here today, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Matt.
Take care.